Right, hello everyone. My name's Alex Driver. I'm the head of industrial design at Team. I've worked in a mix of consulting and academia for the past 15 years. And 8 years ago, I made the decision to specialise in medical. Andrea?
And I'm Andrea Pisa. I'm a senior consultant in the Human Factors group here at Team. I've worked in medical device development for the last 10 years. And I spent a lot of that time integrating human factors within large-scale product development programs.
Great. So today we're going to deliver a joint talk on integrating user centricity into product development. And the diagram that you see on the screen right now is a reflection of Team's medical design and development process. And the point we want to make is that learning about the context of use and stakeholder needs doesn't stop as you move through product development. So as you converge on a design, it's important to continue to test often with key stakeholders and iterate your design. And the other thing this diagram illustrates is that we try to maintain a balance of these three things throughout the process. So user-centered design, commercial and regulatory, and engineering and science. Now, obviously, the focus shifts as you go through the project, but our experience is successful product development involves maintaining that balance throughout. Now, talking about user-centered design, we think there's an increased relevance of this, given a few global trends that have been happening over the last 10 to 15 years. So first of all, HF, human factors regulatory requirements have become more defined and stringent. There's also been a shifting paradigm towards greater provision of healthcare outside of the hospital. For example, tasks that would previously have been performed by trained HCPs in a hospital or clinic might now be performed by less well-trained individuals in the home or in the high street. And this puts an increased burden on users and devices. There's a desire to improve medication adherence due to patients not using their devices correctly or not engaging with their therapy at all. And there's also a push towards improving patient outcomes in the broadest sense. So that's more than just making people better. We want to improve the overall patient experience. And finally, users and patients have a higher expectation of quality and user experience driven by developments in other sectors. And medical companies also are increasingly looking to differentiate their offering through good user-centered design. Now, an example of the impact that user-centered design can have comes from a piece of work commissioned by the Department of Health and the Design Council here in the UK. So the public health provider in the UK is called the National Health Service, and they found they were experiencing 150 incidents of violence and aggression every day in their emergency rooms. And this equated to over £69 million or $87 million in annual costs incurred by the services, as well as significant burden on healthcare staff and other patients. I meant accident and emergency, sorry, not emergency rooms. In-depth research activities were carried out in collaboration with the NHS and found that many people became frustrated with the service because of a lack of clear, effective information and guidance. This lack of knowledge, guidance and information increased anxiety and in turn could develop into aggressive or violent episodes. So based on the research insights, the primary design output focused on a guidance package that communicates essential information to the patients and other service users arriving at accident and emergency. And this contains both generic information relating to the process for receiving treatment, as well as live information relating to the status of the department and waiting times. The result of this very light intervention are really quite astonishing, with a 50% reduction in threatening language and aggressive behaviour post-implementation. And they found that for every £1 spent on design solutions, £3 was generated in benefits. So when we talk about user-centered design at Team, this is what we mean. where design and user insights work in symbiosis with each other, and the solutions are clever and effective in tackling the root cause of an issue and truly meeting user needs. So today we're going to focus on 3 key learning goals. First, we'll explore methods and considerations involved in identifying user insights that can help inform development. Then we'll cover selected techniques for activating these insights and ensure the design benefits from usability input. And lastly, we'll focus on the importance of looking beyond the product and truly designing a user's holistic experience. We'll tackle this one last, but that's not to say it's only considered at the end of development, rather the opposite. To have a truly impactful design, you have to maintain this focus throughout development. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrea.
Okay, so starting with identifying user insight. So the very first thing to do is actually qualify the need for a study. It's very easy to think about user centricity and jump straight into, okay, we need to run a study, and that could be the case, but actually we want to qualify at points during that development when it actually will provide value. And in fact, there are many other ways of capturing usability input other than running a study. So we can leverage existing literature, we can run use-related risk assessments, we can conduct analytical usability evaluations with human factors experts. There are many different activities we can do, but there are times, however, when these secondary or analytical activities aren't sufficient in assessing a solution, and these are the times that we need to run a user study. So critical to success of any user study during the formative phases of development is to involve the cross-disciplinary team that is working on the project. There are many reasons for this, but 2 that really stand out are the need to identify the knowledge gaps we need to fill as a team, but also to involve the technical team members into the research process from the very early stages, because that will ultimately pave the way for adapting the design based on the insights after the study, and it will sort of set the mood of how we want to approach and collaborate throughout the program as a whole. A good way of doing this is to define research questions together. So collaboratively defining and aligning on the study focus, it sort of sets the foundations of how we want to work, and is also the basis for how we will later report on the insights. So this makes sure that we answer the right questions and we fuel the development with relevant and rich insights. So now when we know what to focus the study on, we move on to how best to answer those research questions. It's easy to assume that once these prototypes are ready, we can simply stick them into the study participants' hands and yield value, but that's actually far from the truth. We need to carefully consider what study format is most effective in responding to the research objectives that we've set. And we need to actually develop prototypes that are suitable for that specific study format. The best way to achieve this is, once again, close collaboration between the research and the technical teams. So in terms of study material, this might mean actually stripping back complexity from a product and only evaluate either a looks-like or a works-like prototype with users. Other times, the other might be true. We might need to develop a study-specific prototype that with additional functionality than the product we're intending for market. So an example of this is if we need to capture user-applied forces to a product to understand what kind of specifications we should be designing the product to. And in these scenarios, we might actually integrate sensors and other technology within the product in a discrete way in order to not just capture qualitative data from the participants, but also quantitative data in the forms of force interactions during product use. Moving on to the study formats, this can range widely from remote interview sessions. We can do co-creation sessions, more traditional simulated use evaluations. We could do cadaver labs. There's so many different formats that we can take. And there are really endless options, but the best option is always one which is carefully chosen against what you're interested in learning, and then building the study design around answering those questions.
Great. So for each learning objective, we're going to give an example case study. So this first case study is for a point-of-care diagnostics instrument, which we helped develop, called Lumira DX. And it's a really good example of a technology that's democratizing healthcare, by which I mean it's taking something, a lab test that would have previously been performed in a centralized lab, and putting it in the hand of a wider range of users. So this could be a doctor's surgery, pharmacy, in the home, or in a resource-poor setting. So we were involved in the very early stages of development, helping to define what the product would be, right up to industrialization. So it was a very big multidisciplinary team. Over the course of the project, we conducted significant contextual research and frequently tested our ideas with users to confirm that we were on the right path. And we used a range of methods over the course of the project to keep usability at the heart of the development. So the first example you can see at the top of the screen on this next slide is using flashcards and a block model. Basically, we were able to produce a super low fidelity simulation of the final product experience to understand stakeholders' expectations and comprehension of the system. And this was really very, very early stage in the development. We conducted smaller scale studies internally to answer very specific questions, i.e. what size and position of sample port is most likely to encourage the user to apply the correct amount of blood. We ran full-scale formative studies in which we were simultaneously testing both the physical device design, the on-screen UI, and printed instructional material. And in addition to HF and design, we had mechanical and electronics and software engineers observe some of the case studies, which we found very important. Interesting to note that the UI workflow we found impacted the physical device design and vice versa. So, for example, we needed a lockout on the door while the sample test was being run. So the next slide gives another example of some qualitative methods that we used during this project. In addition to the qualitative methods I've already spoken about, we used some quantitative methods. So, for example, we used eye tracking to record what users were focusing on during the study. And this gave us two things. It meant that when an issue occurred, we could go back and interrogate the video to try and understand the cause of their confusion. And the glasses could generate heat maps, depending on where the users had been looking. So we could use that to interrogate the UI or printed instructions to see what users were focusing on or ignoring. Other examples of more quantitative methods include force and handling measurements used, for example, in relation to injection devices. And the result was that almost every design decision we made on this project was based on evidence gained through user research. And that meant the device could gain a clear waiver, which is an FDA certification to approve the design for use in the widest range of contexts. So now we'll move on to our second learning objective.
Okay, so we've now identified user insights, and it's time to actually activate them. This is when we ensure the design responds to the usability input, and the overall program actually benefits from the usability activities that we run. So needless to say, the data analysis and reporting needs to be impartial and shouldn't be influenced by any other factors on the program, such as whether an identified risk would impact project timelines. We need to stay true to that analysis and reporting. And a good way to achieve this is to structure it against the study objectives that were originally defined before the evaluation took place. This makes sure that you answer the research questions that were highlighted as important for the team and the development stream. Once these insights have been synthesized, however, it's time to identify what challenges to solve. We don't need to we don't need to respond to every single insight that we identified. Prioritization can be used, and we can use different ways of prioritizing during the program. So typically within the medical industry, risk is a leading sort of parameter of identifying which insights we should be responding to, or which risks we should be mitigating against. But also we could look at predefined product requirements. There are cases, for example, where commercial opportunities could also be used in order to, for example, leverage on an insight that we found to produce a USP or some kind of commercial advantage. That could also be a reason for responding to a certain type of insight. So it usually depends on the project, but regardless of which approach you take, you should have a sound rationale for the decision making after a study. And once again, you should always include a cross-disciplinary team for a balanced view. So as we all know, documentation is of course part and parcel of working within a regulated industry like the medical industry. So whilst this is of course necessary to do and is important to do, it's not always the best way of disseminating the insights within a live development program. Here, the mode of communication and particularly the timely delivery of insights can really be key to make sure that they are integrated into a fast-paced design process and we can gain value from them. So thinking about who your audience is, how they prefer to work, these are the kind of things that can provide insight into how they would likely want to consume the information. And I think we can all agree that not all of us are responsive to an 80-page Word report. So it's really important to think about how do we activate these insights in the most effective way possible. A couple of ideas of how we can do that is to, for example, showing anonymized video clips. That can be a really, really powerful way of gaining people's engagement and empathy and sort of motivation to responding to these insights in an appropriate way. We often use quick readout reports of results as well. This is a good way of being able to, in a timely manner, feed into ongoing development opportunities or development streams to make sure that as a research team, we're not a bottleneck. Another way that I really like is to produce summarized table of insights. You can use that then to capture traceable evolution of what the raw data was, what the insights were, and then what the response or the risk mitigations that were actioned. And this is a good way of sort of making sure that we don't forget about any of the insights. And finally, organizing brainstorms is a brilliant way as well. And this sort of brings us back to the idea of tackling not just feeding into a study in a collaborative manner, but also after a user evaluation activity, also continuing that collaboration as a larger team. So how might we statements are a great tool to use after studies to start to reframe observed usability challenges and start seeing them as design opportunities. So running collaborative brainstorms fueled by these how might we statements are a really, really great way of once again getting the team together and tackle these challenges together and find suitable solutions that work across usability, technical, commercial teams as well. So as the design evolves, we want to continuously challenge the design and view it through many different lenses. And there are lots of established and really, really useful user-centric design tools that can help us do that. Just to name a few, design protection and information is one cited by FDA guidance. This provides a really clear hierarchy of preferred ways of mitigating risk in terms of their effectiveness. So we can either design a risk out. If that's not possible, we can incorporate safety mechanisms to protect against the harm. And if neither of those are feasible, and as a last resort, we can provide written information and training to avoid use error. PCA analysis is another tool for sort of injecting usability in a really structured way. Whilst it's typically used to assess and understand why a use error has occurred. It's also a great way to interrogate the design and identify key usability pain points, or to compare concepts in a little bit more of an objective way against each other by comparing user journeys as well as sort of the PCA burden across those use steps against each other. So you can be a little bit creative with that tool. A common tension that we often encounter is a user's interaction with a product during first versus continued use. And we've got a really nice case study on this later on. Whilst we want to make it as simple as possible during first use, this can sometimes introduce product complexity and potential user frustration when it's used repeatedly or over a longer period of time. So finding a suitable solution, a suitable balance here is key to meet the needs of a user both during onboarding, but also throughout their treatment experience.
Great. So our example for this learning objective is this Timper Health smartphone-enabled otoscope. So this device enables a hearing test, wax removal, and a digital ear examination in a single 30-minute appointment at a high street pharmacy. It's another good example of a technology that's democratizing healthcare. And again, this project involved multiple touch points with users to help inform the design direction. So it was a very quick turnaround project, CE marking within 15 months. So we had to do a great deal of activating those insights very quickly. We had regular meetings with the ENT surgeon who had charged us with developing the device. In addition to formal studies, he was regularly coming back with insights gained from his time taking prototypes out into the field. In some cases, we actually made design changes on the fly during some of these review meetings. So, for example, some of his colleagues reported that the weight of the phone was causing wrist strain. So we quickly went into the workshop and mocked up some phone models where we could experiment with moving the weight of the phone closer to the hand. And we also added a hinged handle to accommodate left and right-handed users. And on the next slide, you can see another design change that came after more formal user evaluation. So the need for a light was highlighted by the users so that they could get better imaging of the ear. And also many of them were reporting that they needed a docking station to charge the device. And this would have the added benefit of giving it a home within the GP surgery. So all of these design changes were, direct results of evidence gained in the field and implemented very quickly.
Okay, so last but not least is the importance of going beyond designing only the product, but truly understanding and designing for the user's experience. So whilst I dare to say regulatory expectations focus primarily on product-specific compliance, there is value in considering the bigger picture and actually recognizing that intended users will use your product within a larger ecosystem. So a user is likely to be using your product in combination with other products. So whilst you won't be able to impact the greater system, you should be aware of it and design your product sympathetically to exist within that ecosystem. So a good example of this is designing an insulin pen, for example. So whilst you might not be able to impact how the different glucose meters work or the lancing devices that a user may be interacting with alongside your product, you should have an understanding on what that user experience is like and make sure that the design of that insulin pen works harmoniously and coexists with the other elements to make sure that that sort of holistic experience for the user is as frustration-free as possible. In a similar vein, there is value in considering the full product ecosystem and leverage every single aspect that the user interfaces with. And this is something that is within our control when developing a product. So whilst packaging and labeling can sometimes be left to the very end of development, there are big advantages to consider them early on to provide the user with a really, really well-considered unboxing experience. And this can help guide the user towards desired behaviors from the get-go. And even from sort of more of an emotional user experience perspective, can provide the user with a sense of calm and control rather than a anxiety-invoking first experience of your product system. And that can really make a big difference, particularly within the medical space. So beyond other product interfaces, it's overwhelmingly important to make sure that the product works within the context of use. So we absolutely need to consider the context of use from the very, very start of the development process. And inevitably, as we continue to learn throughout that process, we will also start evolving that understanding. And it's important to respond to contextual insights and make sure the product solution is sensitively designed in response to the environments and the use cases it will be used in. And starting that learning process early on, but continuing being aware of that expanding knowledge as you progress through development.
Okay, so our final example relates to a packaging design for an auto-injector. So increasingly, patients are being asked to self-train in the use of their injectors rather than receive instructions from an HCP. So there's therefore been an increased emphasis on the ecosystem of packaging, instructions and companion apps to guide the user through first use of their device. So this is a flipbook packaging solution that walks users through the features of their injector pen before they've even removed it from the packaging. It borrows from a UI principle called progressive disclosure, in which information is fed to the user in bite-sized chunks rather than being presented to them all at once. And it also primes the user for how the device should be held. The packaging can include a QR code and a call to action to prompt the user to engage with digital training content on a companion app. And this has the potential to be more dynamic, think videos, and perhaps even tailored to the needs of the individual. This ties quite nicely into what Andrea was talking about earlier, which is the tension between first and continued use. So finally, our experience tells us that building a strong team culture is vital in implementing successful user-centered design. And this doesn't happen by accident. It needs to be proactively worked towards. So here are some of the steps that we take at Team to continuously support a positive team culture. And they include doing skill sharing sessions. We use co-working spaces. We invite our colleagues from multiple disciplines into design sprints. And generally, we try to foster curiosity and build on others' ideas. So in summary then, the learning doesn't stop as you move into the later stages of development. Work collaboratively to make the most out of a study by determining the right research questions, carefully defining the study format and designing appropriate study material. The best way to disseminate insights is one that considers the audience and phases of development, so be creative. Reframe usability challenges into design opportunities and tackle them through cross-disciplinary collaboration. Continually challenge your design from different perspectives by applying well-established user-centric tools. Leverage the entire ecosystem surrounding the product to steer users towards desired behaviours. And finally, building a strong team culture is an essential part of success in user-centered design. So thank you very much. We really hope you've enjoyed our talk today.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrea and Tom. So someone said they are curious about how our established processes for translating user insights and needs into device and/or product requirements. Could you elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can kick us off from a human factors perspective, and then you can fill in.
Certainly.
So I think in terms of sort of translating user insights into requirements, I think there are different ways of doing it, and I think this also depends on where you are in the process of development. I think the more traditional human factors perspective of that would be that you run a human factors study, such as a formative study, And then you will identify insights and sort of introduce that into a UFMEA or some kind of risk analysis. And then through risk management, you'll identify certain risks that will need to be controlled or mitigated through risk control measures. And those risk control measures then inform your requirements. We do that regularly. That is sort of best practice, and it's a very common way of capturing use-related requirements. I think obviously because it is so risk-focused, you will be targeting sort of from a usability perspective, you'll be mitigating risks and reducing what sort of the negative. I think here at Team, what we when we're talking about usability and user research, we're not just looking at reducing the negative, but we're actually looking at also, how can we introduce positive user experiences and delightful user experiences. And I think in those situations, translating those user insights into how might we statements, for example, like we talked about in the presentation, and collaboratively work through them together with designers and engineers and different disciplines. And then you can sort of start identifying these pockets of opportunity that you can resolve and actually introduce, sort of nudge the needle towards a much more positive and exciting product solution. So that was sort of two ways of tackling requirement definition.
And yeah, and to build on that as well. So one of the other things which sort of tips and tricks that we use is sort of out of these how might we statements, we might develop a target product profile, which that really helps us define some of the key points at a very early stage, which will then lead us into sort of the creation of these sort of the URS, which then ultimately will go to the PRS.
Sorry, just realised stuff on mute. Thank you very much for that. So another question we've had is, how do you know whether to use a lo-fi or a hi-fi prototype for a user study?
Once again, I think that the answer is probably it depends. I think that there is value and sort of there's value with both, right? And it very much depends. I think lo-fi and many of the sort of the case studies that we shared in the presentation today are very beneficial primarily early on, or if we have a very specific research question that you need to gain insight on. Whereas as you progress through development, naturally you will be evaluating more sort of hi-fi prototypes and more realistic prototypes. And it's important to kind of evolve the research towards more developed prototypes, because without doing that, you will only be answering the research questions that you know, and actually having more refined prototypes, you will be answering questions that you might not have even to questions that you might not even have sort of come across previously. So it is important to sort of start developing and refining the prototypes that you're bringing in to uncover those unknowns. An example that springs to mind is recently we developed a product with LEDs integrated into it, and early on we were able to evaluate comprehension of those LEDs just through using Figma and sort of digital representations of the product. And that was a really quick way for us to get very early insights into, do people understand, and what would they do in response to seeing this particular LED feedback with that iconography. What you can't evaluate with that type of lo-fi prototype is, do people perceive it when they use the product? Did they even notice the LED? The LED color differentiation between different colors, is that easily perceived in a physical form, dependent on environment, lighting and so on. So, whilst we could test comprehension early on, and that could inform the direction that we went in, we then evaluated in subsequent studies physical products as well, to sort of get that bigger understanding of do people understand, perceive, and how do they react to certain levels of feedback.
And I think also it's worth sort of saying as well, and building on some of the stuff which Alex was talking about in the presentation, it's knowing where you are in that process as well, and what fidelity is appropriate. Because say if you're very early on and you're doing a sort of a study where you're exploring form or sort of hand sizes, which you sort of have a direct sort of human element to it, and you want to be testing lots and lots of prototypes, having something which is relatively low-fi gives you a sort of a really good view and feel to sort of test lots of different options without going down and without investing time and going down necessarily that what could be a wrong route. So yeah, early stage with lo-fi is really helpful. And then yeah, as I say, when we go into sort of a larger studies or formative studies, summative studies, you know, you really want to have your high fidelity there, which is sort of really showing what that final product's going to be.
Perfect. So we probably have time for just one more question. Someone has asked, how do you get buy-in from stakeholders to start research early on?
That's a very good question. Do you want to start?
Well, I think you say, yeah, I can start this. So I think, yeah, one of the key things is, you know, getting that early on is, you know, when we're in the starting on the design process, understanding what routes that we want to be going down is really key. So and you know, often is the case with user studies and sort of involving the user, there's multiple avenues that we can do. So one of the things which we do, and we're starting to involve as well in early brainstorms, is involving sort of the users or the clinicians potentially in those brainstorms. So having them and linking them together with, okay, what are the unmet user needs? What are the unmet clinical needs? And that really, so involving them in those brainstorm sessions really helps us sort of define and point us in the right direction. And then often sort of going the next stages would be sort of really lo-fi guerrilla testing, which, you know, is not, it is in terms of a sort of where we can do and what we can get out of it. We can often get quite far in a design process without actually investing a lot of time and money in going for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's I think there's often I guess a misconception where that, you know, conducting research with users takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and I think there are absolutely instances where, you know, that investment is appropriate and justified. I don't think that that's necessarily every single case, and where, you know, you are budget constrained or time constraints, I think what we try and do at a team is to be agile and sort of scope a work package in line with what is realistic. We will always challenge and sort of, you know, push the boundaries, absolutely, but it is to understand some research is usually better than no research at all. Like Tom mentioned, you know, we have a panel of KOLs, you know, that we can have, that we can, with very short time frames, we can involve both sort of patient groups as well as clinician backgrounds into whether it's brainstorms or even sort of early stage, just expert interviews that can even be done on via telephone to not take up too much of their time and be able to sort of gather those user needs very early on at a low cost and in a short time frame. Obviously, once again, as that development sort of goes on, best practices to sort of start looking at other ways of sort of evaluating products, and you will need to sort of start investing more. But where, you know, understandably, we often work with startups, for example, you know, they might not have the funding early on, and it is important then to respond to those constraints and strategize the research approach in a different way to make sure that we are responding to user needs.